Good morning. Let's go ahead and get started. In this session, I want to talk about some of the new XAML control that you can use in Windows Store applications, formerly known as Metro-style applications. And primarily, I'll concentrate on the ones that are either brand new to that specific XAML stack or the ones that are somewhat enhanced. Primarily, like I said, it's all the new stuff. I'm going to do a lot of demos, so if you can't see, you might want to move a little bit closer. My name is Sergey Barsky. I work for Tyler Technologies, which is just an Microsoft independent software vendor and Microsoft Gold partner. I work out of their Atlanta office, and I'm no longer a consultant, so I don't have anything to sell you, unfortunately for you. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. I have my email address on the last slide, and I'll try to help to the best of my abilities. Just to set a little bit of a ground to the talk, I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about Windows 8 style applications. So when Windows 8 shipped, there were two styles of application that it supports. The traditional apps that you could run on Windows 7 or prior, or the new style, which is Metro style or Windows Store apps. And those you have to submit to the new store, of course, and they get vetted. So that's the main advantage of writing store apps. There is this implicit trust between the consumers of those apps, the authors, and the Microsoft. Or Microsoft puts a stake in the game and they guarantee, quote unquote, that they looked at those apps, they verify the apps don't do any harm, and they have some useful capabilities. So that's another thing that they scan for during their own testing phase. And what I'm going to talk about is the store app, so the second type. And there are two types of devices that those apps run on, the full-blown Windows 8 machines and the ones that run WinRT or Windows RT version of Windows 8. And not to be confused with WinRT, which is the runtime under Metro or store-style applications. So I will use those WinRT quite a few times, and I want to make sure that it's clear what I'm talking about. And the apps are designed for touch. So it's a big thing that is implicit to those apps. And all the controls that I'm going to talk about, they do respond to touch natively, some to a larger extent than the others. But they do allow you to write a little bit less code and still have a very broad support for touch, which is used in every tablet device that runs WinRT. But also, if you go to any type of retail outlet, you will see that there are a lot of manufacturers that now ship laptops that are touch enabled, for a fee, of course. But you see that touch is becoming more prevalent out there. And even I catch myself trying to touch the screen periodically because I have a touch device and I have a work machine that is not touch enabled, and I keep catching myself trying to navigate somewhere. So when it comes to writing those apps, you use all familiar tools that you used for other XAML apps like Silverlight or WPF. And I was in that space for many years until kind of came to an abrupt stop a few years ago. The same tools still apply, so you can use Visual Studio and Blend, a combination of the two. In my demos, I'm not going to use Blend, but I will maybe mention that you can use it to do some of the design for your apps. And you can design those controls to some extent inside Blend as well. As far as languages go, I specifically want to talk about C# and VB and really C++ as well, because all of those languages, they use XAML-based user interface. You can also write Metro-style apps in JavaScript and CSS and HTML using what's called WinJS. And WinJS, or projections, JavaScript projection into WinRT, is something that supports for web-based or HTML-based apps. What is interesting, though, that exact same controls I'm going to talk about, they are available for HTML-based store apps. I'm not going to talk about it very much, and primarily because according to even Microsoft stats, the absolute vast majority of apps in the store right now are C# based and XAML based versus the HTML based apps. So it seems like not too many people use HTML based store apps, and I'm not really sure why. I find myself more productive in C#, and that's why I use C# really, for no other reason. And besides the controls I'm going to talk about, there is a whole bunch of other features that are available to store apps developers, like share contracts, live tiles, and you probably want to take advantage of those because they provide a little pizzazz to your apps and provide a little additional functionality to those apps. So one of the example of share contracts would be a search contract, or from main search screen in Windows 8, you can search into your app, or the users more precisely can search into your apps. And of course you can do live tiles, and a lot of apps that are in the store right now, they do have that type of integration with live tiles. So to get started with developing store apps, you need Windows 8 machine, obviously, and if you want a little head start, if you have Studio 2012 or if you're using 2013 beta, if you create a new Windows Store project, you will use one of the templates that come with it. And the one I'm using for my demo is the one that says empty or blank app. And that's because I want to kind of code without having to figure out what's going on in those templates. And there's a ton of samples on MSDN. All of them follow kind of a code behind approach, so they're not as good if you're writing a large enough app, but they're good enough to demonstrate the features. And there's literally hundreds of those in there, broken down by a feature set that Windows 8 supports. So we're going to go ahead and get into coding, and I'll be flipping between slides and the Visual Studio just to make sure I don't miss something that I want to talk about. And what I'm going to start with is list controls. And GridView and FlipView are new controls that didn't exist in any other XAML interface. ListView actually existed before in some shape or form, but it was somewhat enhanced in store apps. And I'll show you like a grouping capabilities of that. So let's try to code one of those list controls. So if you want to see an example of what GreatView Control can do, you can look at the start screen. So you can recreate something like this using GreatView Controls, where you have some grouped data or maybe some loosely structured data, and those things are supported by GridView. So let's go ahead and start. So I have a blank page. There is nothing in it. And the only thing I'm going to say is that I coded a little bit inside my solution so I don't have to code the data. So the demo app that I pre-built, all it has is the view model that has access to data, because it's hard to see what GridView can do for you without some kind of data. So that's the only thing that I did. So now that I have data available, it's available on the context property in my view model. So if I look here, my context is the collection of a contact, which just has first name, last name. And I'm going to use this data to populate my GridView to start with. So what I'm going to do is create a GridView control. If you work with any item-based control, they all inherit from items control, and items control has item source property. An item source is basically where my data comes from. And in my case, it comes from context property on my view model. And in case you're wondering, my view model is already bound to my view. So I can just refer to all properties of my view model through just saying binding and whatever the property in the view model is. So just to make sure you know that there's no magic here. So the last thing I want to do is shape up the display for each item. In my case, I have first name and a last name. So what I'm going to do is create a template here. And I'm going to put the template into resources of my page, and to create this template, I obviously use the data template property, and I'm going to give it a name, standard template. So this is not very interesting, but now I'm going to put some properties in here, and I'm going to create like a stack of controls where there is a text block, and this one I'm going to bind to my first name. And I'm just going to copy this whole thing, and it'll become my last name. So far I have a couple of controls. Just to show you a little bit more what it can do, I'm going to use an image as well. And this one is going to be bound to another property called favorite picture. So this is just an image to show how it looks a little bit better, because it's going to be kind of squished up. So I'm going to hard code temporarily a width and a height of it to 300 pixels, and I do the same thing with an image. I'm going to hard code the width to 300, and I'm going to set stretch to uniform to fill. So now, if you imagine, I will see my name, my last name, first name, and some kind of an image. And all I have to do now with my grid is assign this to items template. Item template would be my static resource, because that's where I put it. And I'm pointed to standard TMPL. So as you saw, I have some IntelliSense. The XAML IntelliSense keeps getting enhanced more and more. So if I run it, if I didn't mess anything up, we should see some grid view, and depending whether or not I have internet connection, the images are coming through. So what you see, I have a scroll bar, but I can also use touch now and scroll over to the right, and you see that my images, they wrap around. So the default behavior of GreatView is that it's going to wrap items around to the right and then down and to the right again until it fits everything vertically, and it'll expand horizontally by default. And what is interesting that you can customize this with another property called items panel template. And panel is where all the items belong. So in this case, it's the wrap grid, which is the specific grid that wraps around. And there's another very, very interesting control that's called variable size wrapped grid. And I don't have a demo for it, but what you can do is have your each item of a different size. So if you want to emphasize a specific item, you can make it bigger using this variable size wrapped grid. And that's what we do in the app. So I'm working for our company, I'm working on Windows Store app, that kind of an enhancement to our standard offering that we have. And that's what we use to highlight certain items in a list. So for example, it's like an HR app, and you see some requests and maybe some birthdays, and those are larger than another tile that is for reports. So the report tile is a little bit smaller. By tile, I mean just an item inside the grid, where the requests are a little bit bigger. So you try to highlight certain items with this variable size wrap grid. So this is how you would do the grid view. And if we flip back and stop that, let's look at the other controls. So ListView is another list box control, and unlike GridView, which by default expands horizontally, ListView expands vertically, just like a normal list view. What you get also out of the box is like a selection, so you can have a visual effect on what happens when an item is selected. By default, it works in single item selection mode. However, I can enhance that by setting the selection mode to multiple. And if you see, as you would imagine, when I click on those, I can select multiple items. And if I click again, it deselects it. So there's quite a bit of functionality there. And exact same selection mode is supported inside GridView as well. So you can select one or multiples. Now the last one that is again is new inside XAML control for Windows 8 apps is the FlipView. And I think I have duplicates in my data, so it may not look exactly right. And what this does, it shows you one item at a time with some scroll buttons that scroll between items. And like I said, I have some duplicates in my data, so that's how you see that the picture doesn't change every time I click. What is interesting though, that this functionality, as you saw, I don't have a visual cues. It's no animation actually when I move between items, and that's because it's not touch screen. So in Windows 8, the animation only occurs on touch events. In 8.1, which is in the preview right now, they enhanced it to where you see animation from the keyboard as well as the mouse, so that FlipView control will look and behave a little bit better, provided some nice visual feedback to the user as you see them scrolling through items. In our app, which is kind of an odd use almost, but we use that FlipView to scroll between details. So each request has a number of details on it, like a few pages of details, and we put that inside a list inside the view model, and the user scrolls through those details using this FlipView. Again, I'm not sure if that's an ideal use for FlipView, but I'm just trying to say that there are a lot of uses that nobody thought of, and that's what we do. So now what I want to do next is demonstrate grouping. And grouping, I think, enhances this control, all the list controls really, except FlipView obviously, quite a bit. So I'm going to switch back to GridView. And now to code the grouping, I kind of decided not to code this in advance because I think it's important to see what happens when you group the data. I think it gives you a better understanding of what grouping is all about. So I'm going to create another class, that I'm going to use for grouping. And I'm going to call it grouped contact. What group contact does for me is provides a way for me to group contact. In this specific example, I'm going to group them on a first letter of the last name. So you'll see like a Rolodex type of presentation where you see the first letter of the last name and all the contacts that follow within that. So it's a pretty typical way to group the stuff, and that's what really the app I'm working on does. It presents your staff in the staff view grouped by last name. So to create that, it's pretty obvious what I want to do. I'm going to create a property called, I'm going to just call it header info. And header info is going to be my first letter. Of course, I need to put a collection in it. And to do that, I will simply inherit from observable collection of contact. So now I have a collection of contacts that I can put inside another collection. So I have a collection of group contact. Each one of those items will have a first letter, which is my header info, plus the collection of items which is contained within my base class. And what I'm going to do is override the constructor, so I can call the base constructor here. And so I can write a little bit less code. And what I'm going to take on the constructor is IEnumerable of contact. I'm just going to call it data. And I'm going to pass this data to the base class. So this is my group data. Now I just need to create it, which is fairly easy. I'm just going to copy the standard contacts, and I'm going to rename them to grouped. And I'm going to rename this to grouped contact as well. And I'm just going to use some shorter names. And this on property change is my notification of I notify property change. And this is going to be of observable collection of grouped contacts. Make sense so far? Didn't lose anybody what I'm trying to do? So now I have to populate this, which is just a couple of lines of code here to create the grouping. And let's see. I'm populating this somewhere. Right here in the initialize. So now what I'm going to do is group this data in context. So I'm grouping my context, which I already got. And I'm going to group C by C dot last name dot substring 01. So which is the first letter of my last name into L group. And I'm going to select an anonymous type here. And all I need is first letter, which is going to be my header info. Is going to be L group dot key, and then contacts would be L group itself. Let's see. So no error. So what I'm trying to do is group the contacts by last name using just a plain query syntax. Then I need to initialize my grouped collection, and then I'm going to simply loop through my query, and I'm going to add this to group contacts, and I'm going to add the group contact, where I'm going to pass in a query.contacts, or variable, not query. And I'm going to use just a class initializer to populate header info, which is going to be variable.headerInfo. This makes sense so far? It's just your basic grouping. So now I need to assign this group data to my GridView to get it to work. And in this case, I'm going to use collection view source class, which will make my life a little easier. And the item source for this is going to be my new property called group contacts. And I have to tell collection view that the source is grouped. And that will teach the grid view to see my data as group data. So it'll look at top level items to say this is my top level grouping, and then inside each item it'll look for a collection, and then say these are the items within that group. So item source here becomes, source would be static resource group source. The same items template, because the item template is not used for grouping. It's still used to show an individual item. And the last thing I want to do, and hopefully the studio is not going to lock up on me here, group style, because it seemed to be dying kind of at this point usually. I'm not really sure why. Group style, group, I think it's called group template. Let's see if the IntelliSense will come back. Header, maybe it's header template, we'll see. Template, and inside here I have a data template. And inside data template, I just have a text block with a text that's going to be bound to my header info. So now I just have to remember what that property is called, and that's why I have it pre-built here. And let's see what's the group style is called. Yeah, header template. I think I got it right, but header template. Oh, I need a group style inside here. That's the problem. Here we go. That looks a little better. So the idea is I use the different group source, and I'm specifying what I'm going to show in the header template. I'm just going to increase the font size so it'll be a little easier to see. So if I did everything right, we'll see what that looks like. So what you see here right on top, you see ladder, individual ladder. So that's my group display. And under each group, wrapping around again, I see all my items that belong to that group. And I can create a little bit better display for the user so that they can see a little bit better as far as if you have a lot of data, it has some commonalities. Using grouping display in GridView is the very useful way to show that type of data. So if I change this to ListView, and I have to change in just one more spot here. Between the ListView and the GridView, the API is almost identical. So even the ListView, which didn't before, but it supports grouping. So we see the next ladder starts here on D. It's not something I can select, obviously, because it's a group. But I could maybe add an event there where I could select the entire group if I wanted to. But by default, you see some grouped data here based on just a few lines of code I had to write. Make sense? Well, let's run again. It's hard. Let me scroll down a little bit. Is it cut off on the projector? Yes. Oh, that's kind of unfortunate. And because it's a Windows Store app, I can't really shrink it very much. So let's see if I can. Well, I could probably make it work for you. Just what I'm gonna do is set up the margin here, margin to maybe like 30, and it should be enough to move that ladder a little bit. I don't. No, it just cuts it off altogether. So you don't see the ladder? Nope. Okay, so I'm going to give it 100 pixels margin. That should move it. And now you see it, right? A little bit. You see a little bit of a ladder. So the ladder is the grouped header that I see. Unfortunately, I didn't even know that the projector was cutting off. So thanks for telling me. I'll try to move the stuff off the left corner for subsequent stuff. So this comes from my view model where I created this group data of group contact. And group contacts is the collection of this class that is in itself a collection. But in addition to being a collection of contacts, it has this additional property called header info. And I populate this header info with the group from the group that is grouped on first letter of the last name right here. So you can create whatever groups you want. Typically, your group source you already have, although you could group on the server as well. It's not tremendously hard to do that either. But if you're getting the data anyway, grouping on the client is just as fast. Really, it's much faster because you don't have that server-side call. So now I'm gonna go into Semantic Zoom, which is one of those really neat controls that I like to show. So what I'm going to do is put Semantic Zoom here, and then I'm going to create a couple of views off of it. And as you can see, the IntelliSense on occasion likes to go away, which is okay. Zoom in view. So I have a couple of things in Semantic Zoom. Zoom in view and zoom out view. Semantic Zoom, zoom out view. And then what I'm going to do, since this is group data, I'm going to say that this is a zoomed in view. And I'm just going to move it. And I'm going to actually made a slight mistake. What I want to do is move this first. So now I can take this and move it here, and I'm gonna change it to GreatView because I think that looks a little neater. So what Semantic Zoom is a control that allows the user to zoom in and allows developer to provide different views if a user uses pinch gesture, or whatever the opposite of pinch is. I don't know. So whatever the opposite is, and what the control will do automatically based on manipulation, it'll switch between these two zoom in, zoom out views. And so you can swap out the insides of that semantic zoom based on that gesture. So in this case, I'm going to call, I'm just going to, in the zoom out, I'm just going to use contexts. And on a zoom in, I'm going to use the grouped data. So if I did everything right, let's run that. So this is a zoom in view, and I'm going to use the control key and just mouse wheel. And you see how I'm switching from group view to ungrouped view. So this is kind of neat visual effect that the users can use, and you can provide them a better view of your data. Again, it's useful when you have a fair amount of data, and maybe you want to show, in this case, just first letter in a zoom in, on a zoom in view, and once they zoom out or the other way around, you can see the actual context versus just the first letter. And of course, you can put events on them, so whenever they click on one of the views, you can programmatically pull in into the other one as well, and maybe swap the views, show them the details as well. So it works with a pinch and zoom gesture, but it works with the mouse as well, and it also works with, well, it doesn't show right now, but see a little minus button here. So if you move your mouse in just the right place, the little minus button will also perform the same thing. So it's a little more useful with touch because it's more natural, but the users that don't have touch devices can still use the same functionality without really any loss of functionality by simply using a mouse and a mouse wheel. So Semantic Zoom is kind of a very neat control that I like to show. There's some other things, so I'm going to swap back to my slides. Make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, Semantic Zoom, I already talked about variable size rep grid. So now I'm going to talk about some other miscellaneous controls that are kind of new. So one is the progress ring or the progress bar. You can use either one. And one useful feature that I find with it, that's what I use it for, is for server-side communication. I want to show users that something is going on. So to use the progress ring and the progress bar, they really are the same. And typically the way I do it, I'm binding to some kind of a busy property on my view model. And I don't have one yet. But this is a pretty typical way for you to do things. So I'm going to create a property called busy. And this is really all I need to do, besides raising on property change, obviously. And if you don't feel like writing this on property change all the time, you can create like a base class that'll do it for you, even based on the new functionality, what allows you to pass in the invoking method via an attribute, and you can create that base view model a lot easier. But the way I typically use it, whenever I populate the data, which is right here, I would set isBusy to true, and then when I'm done populating the data with server-side communication, I'm going to set isBusy to false. So if I run this, let me make it a little bit bigger. Make maybe like 300 pixels. You can see a little bit easier. So if I run this, you should see like a brief moment. Hopefully you saw the little spin wheel. And so this is what we use in our app. I like to show some kind of a progress saying, I'm communicating with the server. We do it when we fetch the data, but also when we submit updates. And a progress ring is the one I use because, like like you saw, the amount of code I have to write is less than nothing. It's like literally one line of code to support something that provides nice visual feedback to the user. Now, the next control that I wanted to show you is AdBar. And AdBar is pretty unique to the Metro style apps. And what it allows you to do is provide some controls that the user can pull up to perform actions. So they call it AdBar. Again, in 8.1, it was enhanced. I'll talk about it for in a few minutes. But the idea is that you create AdBar control and you assign it to your container, either bottom AdBar or top AdBar or both. So if you look at some of the more interesting apps in the App Store like Paint, you will see that Paint actually has two AdBars, one on top, one on the bottom, with a various functionality. Microsoft has actually guidelines that say how you should use them, but they're flexible. So if your app requires a lot of user interactions, you can use both AdBars, and by default, they're hidden. So I'm going to add a button here. You don't really need a name, so I'm going to assign a command to it. And command button is really every button supports commands in Metro style apps, and a command is something that an object that implements iCommand interface. So I created a very, very simple one here. I'll show it to you. So all it does implements iCommand, which has two methods, execute and can execute. So execute is what button is going to automatically invoke for us. So in my command, I'm assigning a method to it that says say hi, on say hi. So I haven't filled it in yet, and I will in just a second, right after I show what that looks like. So let's save that. So one thing that I do, and that's because I simply don't remember all the styles, if I switch to properties and miscellaneous, and I have button highlighted, one of the properties is style. And when you look at standard styles XML that comes with default templates, it has a ton of styles for AdBar buttons. So a recommendation would be that you use one of those, and it supports most common actions. And I'll just use pause button just to have something here. So if I run that, by default it's hidden. The user can swipe from the bottom or the top, depending on which bar they're using. If you're using a keyboard and a mouse, it's Windows Z, pulls up the button. So I'm using the pause button, which is the sum I came up with. But there is a whole bunch of other pre-built styles. Again, some of that got enhanced in 8.1. And it's not going to do anything, but I am bound to my command. So if I put a breakpoint here, it should hopefully be invoked. So it did. So the idea is, with using of commands, is that I separate my UI from my business logic or from my view model using this declarative XAML syntax. And if you look at the demos that are in the App Store, most of them don't use that pattern. So this is not a requirement, but this is the pattern, MVVM pattern, that you will find in pretty much all big apps, because it's hard to keep up with your code behind otherwise, and it's a lot less testable. So what I'm going to fill it in, the first thing I actually missed when I started on WinRT development is the message box. There is no message box in there, and it's something you almost always have to do. And instead of that, there is a message dialog. And whatever. Control that you use. And it has one method, show async on it. And this is how you would show the pop-up boxes or message boxes in your application. So let me click on it again. Still have breakpoint here. And when it comes up, it's the screen wide button with whatever text I put in, or the header text. I can actually do both, and the default close button. So I didn't have to put close button in there, interestingly enough. That was put in for me. So that's pretty basic. You know, OK, sort of like OK button, dismiss the message. But what if you want to show a couple of buttons, couple of messages? So you could create your own custom control, but if all you want to do is ask them a question and maybe have them say yes or a no, why would you want to spend time doing that? So to get around that problem, there is another base control that message box or message dialog responds to, and it's called IUI command. So there is no default implementation for this IUI command interface that certain controls, such as message dialog, understand. An IUI command is simply a command invoked from a UI. It has very few properties in it. It has ID, which is something your code can use to uniquely identify the command that was clicked on, and a label. And a label is what's going to show up on the button, and a method. So when a user clicks on the button, a method that you provided in IUI command implementation is what's going to be invoked. So in my case, I have one IUI command, and my standard implementation UI command, which is like 10 lines of code. And I just simply have test command, and all it does, it just simply echoes to the debug window that says this is the command that somebody clicked on. So it's just a simple thing to demonstrate that it is indeed working. And to add the command to it, dialog property has commands collection, and I can add what is it, show menu command. So nope, not that one. Let's see. What is it called? It's called the PopUpMenu command. Here we go. So if I run this, what you will see that the default button is gone, but instead I have the test button. And the test button is something that was added to my IUI command implementation. Question?
I'm not seeing the AdBar for the pop-up.
Oh, yeah, that's the projector. It's there. Hold on, I need to put a margin on it, and then you'll be able to see it. I'm not sure why this projector is cutting things off, and so I'm going to add a margin to this button. Let's see. It's can you see it now? There we go. I moved it a little bit off the corner, so now it pops up. So the idea is, again, really is twofold. One, if you write these IUI commands, you can separate your logic from your UI, which is always good. And then you can do whatever it is you want to do inside that IUI command. I didn't flip to output window, but here's the echo. It says, I clicked on such and such command. That's why the ID property is there on your IUI command, is so in the handler you can decipher which command was clicked. So what that ID is, the framework does not care. So you maybe create some enumeration that you want to use as something to identify your command. So you can use whatever you want. So ID is just simply for you. It's not for the framework. So another way to present a menu is the pop-up menu. And I have show menu command, I think here, which I did not fill in. So I'm going to switch my button for a minute to show menu command. Show menu command right here. And this is not IUI command, which is okay. And so it should invoke on show menu. So in here I'm going to use another control called pop-up menu. And pop-up menu, just as the name implies, it's like a right-click context menu is what it is. So you can put that really on any control you want. I'm triggering it from the button, but you can trigger it from whatever event you want. So to use that, there is a pop-up menu control that you have to use. And I'm going to create an instance of this. And just like message dialog, I'm going to add show menu command here. That one doesn't work. Pop-up menu command. Let's do this one. And then show async, and all I have to do is give it some location, and just to move it off the corner so everybody can see it, I'm gonna move it to 200, 200 from the top left corner. So it should be down and to the right. So let's see if that works. And we'll see what pop-up menu looks. Again, the pattern that you see is that even framework drives you towards separation of concerns between your UI and your invocation of your methods. So IUI command has something for UI, which is the label, and something for your business logic, which is the method. So they drive you toward this MVVM pattern even if you don't want to go that route. So if I click on it and if I flip back to my output window, I should see that I just clicked on the menu. So the content menu is just something very common in big business apps. One thing you have to remember is that if you're using touch, then a right click is not something that users are going to be able to do. So typically, even for content menu, you want to use some other gesture, such as click, or the touch. And so that's when you want to show your content menu, not based on a right click. And that's why, so I launch it, for example, from AdBar button. So let's flip back to UI. I think the next thing I want to show you is the RichEditBox. And I'm going to simply just delete Semantic Zoom from here and put the RichEditBox in. So RichEditBox, it's sort of a RTF control in the old Windows age, but it was quite a bit enhanced with some really different APIs, and we use it for memos, for example, primarily because it provides some neat functionality here. So let me actually create a couple of rows here. And I'm going to use one for some, I'm going to use it for some buttons. That's why I'm going to set high to auto. And I'm going to put my RichEditBox itself into the second row with the height of star. So that should occupy everything. And I'm going to make a stack panel with some buttons and put the first row, and the RichEditBox I'm going to put into the second row on one, and I'm going to give it a name. And the reason I have to do that, and the RichEditBox sometimes does not conform to MVVM pattern. And the reason for that is because the way I figured it, some of the API is not conducive to it. For example, the content is really, really complex. So binding that or manipulating it is a little hard to do. So if you want to follow MVVM pattern with the RichEditBox, one thing you could do is inherit from it and then put some methods into just one place, which is your control, and then you can bind to that. So if we run this, you'll immediately notice one of the nifty features, which is a spell check. So you don't have to do anything for spell check. It's simply there for you. And that's like, to me, that was to us, it was a big deal. And of course, nobody can see anything. So we're gonna put a margin on it, or maybe 200. And that should be sufficient. There we go. How's now? Okay, now it's better. So if I right click on it, or if touch it, just if I press and hold, I have Looks like some kind of a cross-thread exception here. But typically, if I can collect the spelling errors. Not really sure why that time it blew up on me. Not really sure. But anyway, spell checking comes out of the box. But there are some other nifty features that come out of the box. And in this case, I'm going to put that on my menu command. And I'm going to put some methods here on my code behind. So I'm going to, instead of show menu command, I'm going to replace it with the click event and navigate to that method. So I can manipulate my button from here. So one thing that I can do, for example, is add some font effects to my RichEditBox, which is something that user expects. And what we want to do for now is simply maybe change the selection font to italic. So to do that, I have to get the selection from my box, from RichEditBox control, and it's from document selection, and I have to protect it to make sure user actually selected something before I do anything. And then I can do selection dot character format. And I have some bunch of properties in here. I have italic, I have bold. Let's do bold, for example. And I think I closed it a little too fast. So some of the controls you have, I can turn bold off or on, but one interesting thing that you would typically do if you want to show, kind of use Word-like interface, the bold button will toggle the selection. So in this case, let's see what I can do to toggle the selection. So I'm going to say bold. I'm going to select that to create the selection. Flip to my button, and you see that the font got bolded. And if I click on it again, well, first I got to select it again, but I click on it again, then it went to standard style. So pretty easy way of doing it. And like I said, I can do italics the same way. I can simply just change what property I'm trying to animate, select that, go to my button, and then I change to italic. So there's all your traditional properties for the font are there. One more interesting thing is it has built-in capabilities to find things. So if I want to find something, let me define a control that I'm going to use to type something in. Okay, hold on. It switched on me. So I'm going to add the text box. And again, I'm going to give it a name. So I can type something in and then click on a button and actually, I'm going to do something different. So I'm going to add the text change event in here instead. And what I'm going to do in my change, the text event, I'm going to try to find all instances of that text that I'm trying to type in my control. So let's see if I remember how to do that. So it's going to be box.document. It's a basic unit that contains the text inside the actual RichEditBox. And I'm going to get the range starting with position, and there is a text settings, I think, control, text settings. Let's see if I got this right. Well, doesn't work. Text. Nope, that's not it. So I'm just gonna go with it into max value. That should work just as well. What I'm trying to do is get the whole text. So there is a specific constant for it, which I really don't remember what it's called, but we can look it up in a minute. And now what I want to do is simply clear that first. So I'm going to do range, character, format, background color, I'm going to change it to white. What I'm trying to do here is simply clear it. So I type something in, I'm going to highlight it in some fashion, but before I highlight, I want to clear all other stuff. And what I want to do is actually move it to the beginning first. Text range unit, and we're going to say character, I think. And I'm going to move it to the beginning. I'm going to do that, then I'm going to move it to the beginning again. And now what I'm going to do is keep on looking for that specific text. So I'm going to do range.findText. The value is going to be my findBox.text. And then I'm going to start at position 0, and then find option. I don't want to do case sensitive here. And while I'm finding it, I'm going to change the background. So I can say range.character format.background color colors.yellow. So we'll see if I got this right. So let me type something into this box. Awesome. You can't really see what I'm doing again. So let's put a margin of maybe 100 up here. Let's see if text box will show up. Sometimes ML Designer has a mind of its own and start creating duplicate handler here for me. Text change. This one. Okay. You can sort of see it. So let's try to type something in. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Now if I type 1, it doesn't highlight the last word, so I obviously made a typo in here somewhere. Find scan length. Oh, I do 0. What I should really do is do int.max value, like this. Let's see if that works. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. So now it works, but it also works if I start deleting, and that's because I'm clearing. So this is kind of neat if you're trying to give user like a large document to scan, then they can start typing and go highlight the text, or even navigate to the text. So the amount of functionality that is provided by RichEditBox is kind of big. So this is just a small fraction of everything that it provides. Don't want to talk much about WebView. It's just, what the name implies, it's just a web HTML viewer, is really, for lack of a better word. That is based on IE10, obviously. In Windows 8.1, in that update, the WebView got enhanced actually with a very, very good enhancement that it can now overlay, you can now overlay XAML control on top of WebView. And so prior to that, the WebView was always top level control. So if you want to put something on top of it, you have to hide it, or it's going to bleed on top of XAML control. So that's fixed in 8.1, which leads me to the next topic of 8.1 update. So what's new in 8.1? As you know, beta of 8.1 was released at the Build conference, I guess about a month ago, give or take. What is interesting though is Microsoft announced that they're not going to make RTM version available to developers, only to OEM, which is companies like Dell and HP that makes the hardware. So they will get RTM version later on this month or maybe early next month, but developers won't. And so as a result, you won't be able to play with RTM until October. Not really sure why that happened. But it has important updates. I already talked about WebView. There is a new hub control, brand new hub control, and I really didn't want to put 8.1 into my demos because I was afraid that they really wouldn't work at all, honestly. So I didn't want to risk it. So that's why for 8.1 I have a very good PowerPoint demo here. So hub control is something that you can do where you section off your front screen, typically what you would do. So hub control supports these sections, and you can have a header in there and some content, doesn't matter what the content is. So it's sort of like a header content control that is grouped into the single hub. So what it allows you to do is create some kind of a front-end user interface without a menu. It's kind of a menu-like abstraction. I'm not sure what the right word is, but it gives user navigation capabilities into big parts of your application. And those you would put into hub sections. AdBar got enhanced a little bit, although those to me are kind of minor. So Microsoft design guidelines recommend that you put primary buttons on the left and secondary buttons on the right. So you can easily do that by putting two stack panel into the AdBar and aligning one to the left and one to the right. Pretty easy to do, but they try to make it a little bit easier now. So now you have collections on the AdBar called primary commands and one called secondary commands, and that will automatically handle alignment for you. So you don't have to try to figure out how to do it with a couple of stack panels. There is also a separator, which is like a vertical bar that you can put in there that would separate your command into some logical sections. If you had to do settings, integration with settings, which you would, according to design guidelines, you have to do, if your app has settings, whenever settings option is invoked in Windows and your app is active, then it will call into your app and ask for a control you want to show in the settings section. So that made it a little bit easier with the settings flyout, that you can just simply create a settings flyout control in XAML declaratively and simply return an instance of that control. Makes it a little bit easier to build settings flyout. The same goes with menu flyout. So the flyouts are available on all controls. So if a user clicks on a button, you can put a flyout into the button itself, and it'll automatically pop up to the user and show them the flyout stuff. So it's sort of like tooltip, but it has a lot more functionality in it. It's sort of tooltip with commands, is the way you could think about it. If you ever build a business app, you always label stuff. So you have typically a label and then text box or whatever else you want to do. And so this is pretty repetitive. So you always have to drop text block control into your page with every input control, which is annoying, but that's what you deal with. So now what Microsoft did, which is interestingly enough, I coded something simple in my WPF app I worked on. I have this combined control that contains the text blocks and the text box. And it's exactly what they did. So for all input control, they've added header property, and if you set it to some string, it'll automatically add a label for you, set to that header. So it just lets you type a little bit less and have fewer controls in your XAML. They also added date and time pickers that I think third-party controls had before, but you had to buy their set. Now the date and time picker that are touch-friendly, obviously, with the big pop-ups where you can, if you use a phone, you know what I'm talking about, where you have a little scroll wheel to set up a year and a month and a date. So they have that for date picker and for time picker as well. And like I already mentioned, the web view got enhanced quite a bit in 8.1. So the common theme for 8.1 is make developers more productive and let them make fewer mistakes, is really what you see as a common theme. But there is one break and change. So if you move into 8.1, something you have to keep in mind, the whole snapped view is gone. So if you have an app in the App Store, if you want to move it to 8.1, now you have to figure out how to have resizable views. And so what Microsoft recommends, so you don't have a snap anymore. You can still have a portrait or landscape, or user will be able to change the size of your app, however they feel. So they can resize it to tiny or full screen. And so the power is in their hands for 8.1. So it's a really user-oriented feature. As a developer, your life, however, is going to get a lot more challenging, because to me it was easier to accommodate 1/300 pixel view than try to think of the entire range from 0 pixels to, I don't know, 1,000 pixels, and how you want to adjust your view in what increments. So you may be stuck supporting one view, but then if they squish it to really small, it's not really even useful. So you would have to figure out how to swap out your XAML templates with something that will look better in a small layout. So that's sort of an unfortunate change. It's a big breaking change, really. And it requires you to think really, really hard about designing your user interface, unfortunately. So in conclusion, I have some links. If you're just getting started, step by step is really, generationapp.com is a really good way to get started. It has links to almost everything else. And design guidelines are explained really easily in this UX pattern links. At least that's what I found. It's a little bit more visual and a lot less stuff you have to read, whereas the main design guidelines document is like 300 pages long. I still haven't read it, honestly. It's just too long. And if you have any questions, you can email me, and my email address is also on my blog. I will post the slides if you're interested. The demo app is a lot less interesting, but I will post that as well if you feel like downloading. It has some useful, hopefully, information for you. And I actually did record this demo as well. And what I'm going to do